Samalolaya Tashle. Today is 7th November. In the last few weeks, we talked about the reasons why I'm standing for this election. What are the principle, the way, means, and the objective of how I would achieve or function my responsibilities if you entrust me the job of Sikyong. And then on 17th October, we covered how do we resolve the issue of Tibet. And then on 24th of October, we discussed about the roles and responsibilities of the Kashak. And last week, Saturday, we discussed about how do we strengthen the Central Tibetan Administration, which is the institution at the top of our organizational structure in exile. Now today we'll talk about another important topic, that is strengthening local Tibetan communities. Now how do we strengthen, when I say local Tibetan communities, then we are talking about the Tibetan settlements in India, Nepal, Bhutan, the scattered communities in India and Nepal, and then also the scattered communities in some ways of the Tibetan diaspora community outside India, Nepal, Bhutan, all across the world. Now to start with, we all know that in the last more than 60 years, under the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we managed to establish new compact Tibetan communities in India, Nepal and Bhutan with the help of many kind individuals, organizations and government, particularly Indian government, in the resettlement project. And progressively, we also started setting up the offices of the settlement officers, the local Tibetan assemblies. We also set up a lot of cooperatives in some 15, 16 different settlements. Then we also set up local judiciary commissions, which are the three pillars of democracy, even at the local level. Now, this structure that we created under the leadership of His Holiness Dalai Lama helped us in creating a thriving, in some ways, agri-based and in some industrial-based economy, supplemented by earnings from the enterprises that different Tibetans engage in. Now, even though the number of Tibetan population in exile is very small, establishment of monastic institutions, educational institutions, traditional and allopathic medical facilities, all these enabled us to overcome our existential problem, whether the Tibetans in exile would survive or not, under very difficult circumstances. And more importantly, this helped us in preserving our identity to thrive as a people and as a community. Now all this happened because of the far-sighted vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We should never ever forget that. Now, however, over the last 3 decades, our society has been undergoing huge demographic shift from India, Nepal, Bhutan to the countries in the West. And because of this, many opportunities also came. And then it also threw in a large number of challenges that any leadership has to deal with. And there's no way we can get away with it. So I myself, personally, being someone who was born in a settlement, brought up in a settlement, and having seen most of the other Tibetan settlements in India and Nepal, I have a fair knowledge of how to meet these challenges. Then, when we talk about these demographic changes, as per the population statistics that are available today, I think it still needs a lot of revision. It looks very likely that we will shortly cross the halfway mark between the Tibetans in India, Nepal, Bhutan, and those who have moved to the west. Now, in that context, it's not enough just to plan development and improving efficiencies of the Tibetan settlements in India, Nepal, Bhutan alone, but we have to factor in and also plan for the Tibetan communities spread all across the world. Now, that is an integral responsibility of the Central Tibetan administration. This is also the reason why I titled today's topic as Strengthening Local Tibetan Communities. Now, coming to the topic, I have said in my campaign slogans that my principle is to be equitable. Now, when we talk about development and well-organized Tibetan community, the basis of policy making and framing programs should be the population and the environment surrounding it. Equal and fair treatment to both the settled and scattered communities is prerequisite of an equitable policy. Now, how do we achieve that? We have at many times talked about co-effort. It's cooperative or collective effort of all the local stakeholders, whoever they are within a settlement. All these stakeholders will be pooled collectively to make the programs, including the guidance of the local members of parliament. Now, depending on the nature of the program, we will either adopt top-down approach or bottoms-up approach, as I mentioned before. Now, there are certain criteria for a sustainable, thriving Tibetan community in exile. Now, should I be, if you entrust your vote on me to take the responsibility of Sikyong, now what I would do to strengthen the local Tibetan communities. The first, I'll talk in terms of the compact settled communities. Number one, now the main important component of a sustainable, well-efficient community is the people, the number of people. Not just in terms of numbers, but more particularly, the number of people who can procreate, that means produce children, or be productive in labor. Now, a demographic, what I feel is that in the first year of my service itself, we should conduct a thorough demographic survey. Depending on that survey, we will develop short-term, medium-term, and long-term programs. Now, what are the ways and means to bring in people into the settlements? People who have gone out of these settlements, or people who want to move into bigger settlements. That is going to be our ultimate aim. Now, in the short term, what we need to do is we need to acquire land in the bigger settlements where we can create space for vulnerable communities, those who are small, those who have existential problems, so that not by force, but by voluntarily, they can move to bigger settlements and the population in the bigger settlements will improve. In the long term, all these people will settle into bigger Tibetan communities, and then it will become easier for the Central Tibetan administration also to administer these settlements in larger, compact communities rather than having too many scattered communities. Then we will also seek the advice of the host nation, whether it's India or Nepal, to allow Tibetan retirees in the West, Tibetans, those who have moved to the West, now who are retired, and they want to come back to spend the rest of their life in the Tibetan settlements without permit problems. These are something that we are dependent on the host nation, and we'll definitely discuss with the host nation to see the possibilities. So these are the ways that we can bring people into a community back again. Now, the second criteria is for a progressive community, there's a need to strengthen existing institutions, whether we have health institutions or whether it's medical or social welfare or religious or educational or business opportunities. So we have to expand the present capacity of these services, and then also create new business opportunities that will create job for the young and make it feasible for them to come back and return to the settlement and contribute in the building of the community. Number three is, for any successful community, a well-equipped school that meet the need and aspiration of a child is very, very important. Now, in my case, what we will do is we will strengthen the schools to provide the best possible education for our future generation to blossom into excellent human beings. Now, not talk more on this because the next week I'll be speaking separately on empowerment of youth and women and how to work with them. Number four, now after school, is health. A healthy health system is not just necessary from a health perspective, but also in the form of productivity. Because a healthy person can be productive, a sick person cannot be productive. So we will not only increase the capacity of traditional Tibetan medicine, but also increase the number of allopathic medical staff. That will not only provide jobs to doctors and nurses, but also we will cater to door-to-door checkup of the old people, sick people, and infirm people, people with pre-existing conditions. We'll make that happen. We'll cater these services to the people. We will also we have to develop expertise in the treatment of the most prevalent diseases. What are the most prevalent diseases within a community, and how do we address them? So we'll have doctors and nurses to specialize in diseases that are more prevalent within the Tibetan community. After health is agriculture. Of course, when we started our settlements, all our sustenance is dependent on agriculture. Now, owing to the small size of land holdings and also depending on the vagaries of nature, the income from farming has become secondary to small businesses. Nonetheless, the farming community needs assistance, advisories, and particularly relief when they have crop failures or natural disasters, affected by natural disasters. Then one of the main responsibility or in the way in which we strengthen our community is to care for our aged population, for our poor families, and vulnerable families that need subsistence assistance from the Central Tibetan Administration. Now, a social welfare program for sick, poor, and needy will be one of the core responsibility of the Central Tibetan Administration, and we will also seek cooperation of the former settlement people who have moved out to other countries to contribute in this effort to look after the sick and infirm and the aged within the community. Number 7 is the youth. I'll not speak much about youth today because next week I'm going to speak about it. But youth are the foundations of our community. They are the future of the community. They are the future leaders of the community. And now within that, if you have unemployed youths who are eager to learn some skill that the community also needs, where after learning that skill, that person can also make a living out of it, we will give all necessary training for that motivated unemployed child. At the same time, we'll also provide easy loans with low interest for these people to start their own business, and thereby eventually also people other employ other people to work with him or her. So that will be one of our focus. Then within the community, when you have more and more younger children, then we have less problems with the capacity in the schools. Uh, but we'll have to give special nurturing to the school students and the university students. We need to engage these young children in the development of the community. So we will not only organize workshops and seminars to increase their awareness, but we'll also provide them opportunities to work with us during the summer holidays to work on special projects that will create better understanding of the community for these people, which will also help us in our research work. So such projects will be undertaken during the holidays for the children to get involved with the administration. Then one of the larger community are the ex-servicemen within the Tibetan settlement. They play in many Tibetan settlements. They play leadership roles at many layers of the community, and to respect their selfless contribution. Lately, there has been good recognition from the Indian government and service for the ex-servicemen from the Indian government. But from the Central Tibetan administration side, what we can do is to provide a coordinator for the ex-servicemen in the security department of the CTA, so that we can help in coordination and also facilitating or in facilitate reaching out to the Indian government whenever it's necessary. Then, of course, we have to render all our services to the religious institutions, because institutions form the basis of how sustainable a society can be. The more institutions we have, that much more jobs we can give to the people. So we will not only cater our services to the religious institutions, the monastic institutions, but also the artistic and cultural organizations like Lamo Tsokpa and others that play a very important role in preserving our unique arts and culture. And also, the Tibetan arts can be a good employment opportunities for youths. Then the local elected leaders, whether we call them camp leaders or whoever, they are the ones who work day in and day out with the local population, right? So to compensate their selfless service, right now they are paid a very minimal sum, with in some cases contribution from the cooperative society and contribution from the settlement people, which hardly comes to nothing in terms of how much they earn. So the CTA, to compensate their selfless service, we will provide equal share of honorarium to these camp leaders and elected local leaders, so that they can spend more time in coming up with projects, in working with the local members to see how the community can be built up from the bottom. And they need to be encouraged. Some people, this question always comes wherever I go, whenever we discuss something. At the end of it, then everybody says, "Can you send one person from our family to the United States or Canada or Europe?" Now, when we talk about strengthening the Tibetan community, so we are not talking just about strengthening the community that are in India, Nepal, and Bhutan, but also we will also look at opportunities of official immigration to other Western countries. I have, in fact, talked with some people, and there are. It seems like there are good opportunities if we can take that. So, but I cannot promise you anything, but we'll definitely look into the possibilities of immigration of Tibetans to other countries. Now, with regard to scattered communities like the uh, Tibetan associations in Europe, United States, and Australia, and other countries across the world, one thing is the organization itself, the Tibetan associations. In Tibetan, we say Piri Sopa or Piri Chidin Sopa. The very fact that we have these Tibetan associations, that the Tibetans in these respective places started their own Tibetan associations, shows the volition of people's initiative in creating an organization that connects all of us and keep us together. So Tibetan associations play a very important role in keeping the largely scattered Tibetan community, even in terms of physical distance, it's more, but still it helps us to keep our community together. That is why, in tune with the growing number of Buddhist centers, growing number of Tibetan people in the West, wherever necessary, we will increase the capacity of the offices of Tibet. When I say we'll increase the capacity of offices of Tibet, right now we are looking at 4, 3, 5 staff in one office, which has to handle many different kind of work that they are entrusted with it. So eventually we'll need one more additional person in the bigger Tibetan communities where they are, a person to just maintain relation between the Tibetan communities and the central Tibetan administration. So the people have their relations with the Tibetan communities, the communities with the central Tibetan administration, and thereby network the whole community together. Then we can also look at, I tried in the United States, we can also look at a homogeneous structure for all the Tibetan communities that does not go against the law of the land, and that conforms with the norms of the central Tibetan administration. And through that way, it will pave the way for the Tibetan communities to be included under the provisions of the charter. Right now, the Tibetan communities are not. So we will eventually include the Tibetan associations within the provisions of the Tibetan Charter. Now, number 15 for the scattered Tibetan community, the third important thing is that the community centers. Now, I have traveled to many parts of the world where there are Tibetan communities, and I find that wherever there are community centers, it creates a sense of belonging, and also it creates a sense of ownership of the community. Now, most of these community centers, purchase of these community centers were made possible because of the proceeds from His Holiness Dalai Lama's visit to these areas, or direct contribution from the Gandhe Photang office so far. Now, for those who have not been able to acquire one, under my administration, we will instruct the officers of Tibet, the representatives or the responsible person, to play a proactive role in helping, in assistance, and in helping the Tibetan communities to acquire community halls. That is also a very important criteria in bringing our community together. And the next is the weekend Tibetan classes. I know many teachers, many educators have selflessly dedicated their time in educating our students in the West in Tibetan language, in Tibetan arts and culture, dance, drama, those kind of things. So what we can do from Central Tibetan administration is to ensure that enough supplementary reading materials are available in Tibetan for these students to have access to, so that The weekend Tibetan classes just does not become a class to teach Tibetan language, but also teach these children on good human values of what is right, what is wrong, what is beneficial, what is not beneficial. Those kind of issues that the children has to learn. Then, then one of the major institution is the Buddhist associations or Buddhist monasteries in the West. Now they have over several decades have been in the forefront of spreading awareness on Tibetan religion and culture. With the growing numbers of Buddhist centers, with a growing number of Tibetan population, now we need to create cooperative programs and projects for the Tibetan communities to work with the Buddhist centers, to work with other organizations, the Tibet support groups, to foster a more cohesive community. Now, and for any community to survive in the long term, the involvement of the younger generation in leadership roles is a prerequisite. There is no way we can get around it. We all know that. Now, I have and I will in future also continue to work very closely with the young Tibetans in informing them, in empowering them, and in involving them in community building and leadership. Now, harnessing the intelligence of the youth and optimum use of not only their physical resources but their digital resources. They know how to make use of digital resources, and through the digital resources, make many things easier and far-reaching. And that way, we should have more and more meaningful, I say meaningful relation between the Central Tibetan administration and the Tibetan youth at large. And this will be one of the primary focus of my administration. Then, now when we talk about Tibetans in the West, how do we eventually going down the lane, how do we organize ourselves? Is it possible to have compact communities in the West? Now, I have friends who are working on those ideas, but with the backing of the Central Tibetan administration, we can definitely make it possible. We can look at areas where there are a larger number of Tibetans, like New York, Minnesota, Bay Area in the United States. Then you have, Toronto, Calgary, and similar places in Europe and Australia where there are a larger number of Tibetans. And wherever there are a large number of Tibetans living in a city, of course they are scattered within the city, we can look for places just 1 hour outside the periphery of that city so that we can create a separate community there where the elders and the children can live there. Working parents can go work in the cities and then come back to the community in the during the weekends and holidays, and then we can create a Tibetan ambience in that space, a compact community. More and more Tibetans can move there, particularly the elders and the younger. Then you build the bond between the young and the old, and the younger generation can also start learning Tibetan and live in a Tibetan environment. Now we can start kindergartens, school level maybe. That will provide us a very good insight as to whether in future we can start separate Tibetan schools for Tibetan children in the West. Last but not the least, eventually, in the long run, right now we get enough funding from governments and individuals and organizations, mainly because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You never know when government policies changes, when leadership changes, certain policies also changes. So we have to be wary of future developments, and we have to learn to stand on our own field. Therefore, we will definitely encourage relations between the settlement people and people who were earlier settled here but moved out. So, for example, we say ex-BYLAKUPPE International, or ex-Hunsu International, ex-Kollegal International, ex-Mondgot International, who can bring their resources together to build the community here, because they have the emotional connect. The Sister Shija program did not work that well because I can sense that there is no emotional connection compared to what we are talking about. So that is something we'll definitely do. So these, I think, are what needs to be done, and these are things that I assure you we can do. As I mentioned earlier, also, I'm not talking rhetoric. We're talking about things that we can do, and if I get through the preliminaries, then during the final rounds we can go into little more details, timeline as to what needs to be done first and second and third and all that. So thank you for listening. I hope it gives you also little ideas as to how we are structured and how it can be done. I always say the younger generation has to understand our situation, and then they can decide as to what they can do to the community. Thank you so much. And before closing this time, I say these are the hard times. We still have a lot of COVID cases going on. The numbers are increasing tremendously. So please be careful and watchful of your health. And I really look forward to a very successful election process this time. Thank you.